Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. I think the Ravens, Luke, said think positive, test negative, right? Was that I think that was it, right? Certainly this week with the Preakness week ahead, these intelligent conversations brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets, where I think I was strolling through Wise Markets on Sunday afternoon over in Dundalk on my way to Costas to honor my mother for Mother's Day when the word comes down on Bob Baffert. And dude, I know you're in the baseball and the football business, and I know we had the Sox in for the weekend, and we're going to talk some Villanueva and whatnot, but I think it even gets to your desk, right? The horse racing thing, what it means for the state, what the Preakness is about, what Pimlico's about. We're going to have guests galore this week. I got Randy Moss. I got Kenny Mayne. I had Bob Baffert. My Bob Baffert piece is dead. You can find that at Baltimore Positive, Luke, if you want to know what Bob was thinking before the horse tested positive.
Yeah, and you know me, I'm not a horse racing guy in terms of my knowledge. It's very, very limited. I've been to Preakness before. I watch the Triple Crown races every year, although the Derby, I was busy with post-draft residue, so I didn't even get to watch the Derby.
Were you sober at the Preakness or were you not? Be honest. Be really honest.
I was not sober, but I was not out of control either. I was responsible, and I got a ride. It
wasn't like New Orleans, is what you're saying. It wasn't like that.
Exactly. Right. Shh. We don't talk about New Orleans.
Not after Mother's Day. Not after Mother's Day. Don't let Mom.
Exactly. But I was telling you
about to give birth. We can't upset her like that. Gosh.
But it's funny because every year, having covered the Orioles now for about a decade, in the press box, we always draw horses for the 3 Triple Crown races, and I drew Medina Spirit, and I got a little bit of, for amusement purposes only. It was only Monopoly money, wink, wink. But now I'm wondering if I'm going to have to give that back because, well, Medina Spirit and just the craziness of all this. And I said to you, again, speaking as a novice, how crazy has the Derby been the last few years? I mean, you had the DQ, 2 years ago? Last year, the pandemic, the Derby runs in the fall. And now you have this with the Bob Baffert horse, which it's just crazy. So
by the way, the indictment of Baffert coming, and for anybody out there, I mean, I've known Bob 30 years. Yeah. Bob's in my phone. Bob returns phone calls. Bob and I are always threatening to go to Costas and have a crab cake together because he loves crab cakes. And the amount of not my fault, couldn't be my horse. I mean, I saw a president do this for 4 years, right? Like, I saw Lance Armstrong do this. We saw Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa and Rafael Palmeiro. And, cheating is so prevalent, right? Like, it's just, there are people that dig it and love it. I mean, look at Belichick. There's no doubt he was cheating and how often he was cheating. And we're more than willing to look the other way on cheating, right? I mean, that's sort of where baseball is. I mean, look at the Astros. You want to talk about cheating? They're banging on trash cans. You know what I mean? Like, it's not dope the horse a little bit. Maybe it doesn't pee out. We'll just say it's a horse. I don't know what happened. What it couldn't have been. Do the old Joe Negro when you get caught with the Emery board. You know what I mean? Like, couldn't have been mine. I know what you're talking about. We're just some cheating MFers, aren't we? I mean, like, in general, right? Like,
well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, and you mentioned the Astros. I mean, you're still hearing about the 1951 New York Giants and Bobby Thompson and stealing signs. And there's cheating. There's gamesmanship that, I mean, you mentioned Necro. I mean, Gaylord Perry comes to mind where, I mean, talking about Hall of Famers, right? I mean, you're talking about that. I mean, not even getting into the Black Sox scandal or Pete Rose
in their cases, though, there was no doubt they cheated and no doubt that it helped them because that's why they cheated. Well, Barry Bonds wouldn't have been sticking needles into his body and A-Rod if it didn't help. If it didn't help, they wouldn't do it.
Right. But we could also debate how much it helps. How do you try to correct? I mean, that was always the argument with Barry Bonds. I mean, we all remember Barry Bonds being 180 pounds, looking like a skinny rail, but still hitting 35.
Come on, dude. This started with the East German women growing beards. No, but my point, what I mean? Like that literally.
I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, but there is more nuance. I also don't just, because of what I just said, where is the line from stealing signs in the more organic way that you used to think of it, and then what the Astros did. Is it just cheating? It's all cheating and unacceptable, or what's considered okay?
Well, I'll give you a
right?
gamesmanship. I'll give you a gamesmanship. My dude Larry Rosen, when he ran the video board at the Ravens games, and he runs the video board for the Falcons now. He ran it for the Jaguars, right? The whole deal in the organization, home field advantages. If there's a replay that works in our advantage, we show it, and the fans get shitty with the officials. We stop the game, and we win a challenge. If the replay clearly indicts us, I call down to the line. We hurry up. We don't show it in the stadium. The referees don't see it. No speaking, no say. Boom. We got to play. And that's the NFL. And how about piping in the sound when you're in the huddle versus when we're in the huddle? Like, there's so much of that has gone on that is truly a competitive advantage, not to the point of two fingers down, inside, outside, I'm on second base and I wink, or not, all that third base, grabbing your nuts, all that stuff that they do. I hear the sign stealing, but I think there's something way above that we have. In my time, in 30 years, is my 30th anniversary doing this, that we're just looking the other way on anything that's not a blood red murder. I don't know what, I mean, literally, we're letting teams win championships. Everybody knows how cheaty college basketball has been. 40 years of nothing but mafia cheating money that involve universities and coaches making $10 million. Like, it's, like, it's crazy. And now we have a horse who took some extra neosynephrine. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's a horse. 0.10, 0.21. I don't know. I just know that it happens to Baffert's horses, and they win a lot, and they win races they might or might not shouldn't win. And in the same way, the Astros won a lot when they might not shouldn't have won. And I lose confidence in all of it as we're now gambling on apps and things are happening. I mean, at the heart of this, and I don't really care. I didn't bet on the race. To your point, you got $5 Monopoly dollars involved in that and a hot dog. But there is a point where, like, they're running a racket behind this called gambling that's supposed to be fair. And the horse goes off at 12-1 and wins and pisses dirty, and who cashed the ticket and who. Dude, that's the part that's the mess.
Sure.
The mess is the gambling, the adjudication of it, the inquiry part, the who plays God, it's a gigantic mess. I think ethics are up for debate in sports, and if you don't have ethics, I really don't know what you have.
Right. I'll say this: ethics have always been up for debate in sports, and again, there are varying shades of gray, and that's not to excuse the more extreme, obvious examples. I mean, you and I talked at length about the Ravens being completely decimated by a COVID outbreak. Where's the fairness in playing and having to play in that circumstance? I think, though, when you get to these more extreme examples, because I mean, even thinking of like performance enhancing substances, what does that mean exactly? I mean, you could consider coffee to be a performance enhancing substance. I mean, ball players
back better on it when it's Rofo.
Right. Ball players back in the 60s. I mean, greenies were sitting there in bowls in clubhouses. So, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily gotten worse in this day, or it's just there's much more information. There's much less you can hide in when you have technology and you have cameras everywhere and all of that. I
would also say there's much more to get away with it, because once you get away with it and you lift the trophy and you get the paycheck, I mean, none of those steroids guys are good in Nickelback. Some of them have died. Ken Caminiti and whatever the hell happened to Lenny Dykstra and Dutch Dalton and some of these guys. But last I checked, Albert Bell still got the money. They all still have the money.
Well,
and that's really the dirty crime of it all.
But
getting away with it, I guess. Getting away with it.
Fair enough. But then I'd say, in response to that, what about those players who were fringe minor league players who cheated and they ended up making some life-changing money for their family because they hung around in the league for another year or two? Again, not saying it's right. I just think we kind of go down the rabbit hole, and you kind of start examining everything.
I thought Ruben Sierra was going to the Hall of Fame. It just turned out he had a stall next between Canseco and Gonzalez, and Pudge was down there. But Raphael didn't see anything. He knows speaky,
But I think inherently the issue is, and look, we can be morally outraged about this person or this entity cheating or this person doing things on the up and up, and the debate that goes on, and we can all remember guys like Mike Piazza, where it was debated, even if there wasn't hard evidence in the way that there was for other players, or talking about guys that you thought they did, but then we get into
Brady Anderson is still innocent. Completely. Brady Anderson never used steroids.
But again, how do we parcel it all out for guys that there isn't damning evidence that's right there? And we can't just look at the numbers either. I mean, Davey Johnson hit 43 home runs out of the middle of nowhere in the early 70s. So, but the core of the issue, the core of the concern, and this is where it brings us back to talking about horse racing, talking about Bob Baffert, the incredible track record and success. When something like this happens, it calls into question the legitimacy of it. Is it on the up and up? Cheaters have existed since sports have existed. I mean, you're always going to have some of that, but and again, not excusing it, but
my little Venezuelan friend coming around third base and holding the wire, like winning the World Series and holding the wire, like I have, all of the credentials of all that they've done doesn't really get called into question. I don't know. Like when your 12-1 horse wins and you get to have a party and you get to have fun, and do you care that you get blown apart 3 days later? I don't know. In Baffert's case, it's different because he's got a whole gig. In one, Manny Alexander's case, I think it's a little different. I mean, there are different circumstances in these things, but I do think the shame of it's gone. That's my point. My point is, do it, get away with it. Don't ever admit to it. Don't ever apologize for it. Count your money. Come back, run the Orioles. Oh no, that's a different story. But there is no piper to pay for Bill Belichick,
but there has been for Rafael Palmeiro, though.
He's got his money.
He's not in the Hall of Fame. Okay. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Well, but you're just don't brush it off that it's. I mean, you're telling me he hasn't lost a lot financially from not being in the Hall of Fame compared to a guy who, if he never tested positive,
he should have never had. That he should have never had.
But my point is, you're saying no one's paid the price. Sure, they have. I mean, there have been individuals that have paid the price.
They've been overcompensated. Now, in the end, Rafael Palmeiro was way better off using and making $100 million than not using and being a punch and Judy hitter that made $12 million was out of the league.
But what's the solution to this? I mean, we're other than just being ticked off.
I don't know that there's a solution. I think it's been 75 million people voted for a con man, again, who just got up every day and just made stuff up. It's still making stuff up. And so when you're willing to look the other way on people climbing the Capitol in democracy and calling an election rigged that wasn't rigged, then what hope do I have that Jose Canseco's record's tainted, or that someone will say that Baffert cheated? He's got a closet full of Triple Crowns. If he cheated, he cheated. If he didn't, he didn't. He's not giving them back. He's not giving the money back. Any of that. Lance Armstrong. I mean, that's my point, that if you are cheating, you're not cheating, you're trying, that when you do get caught with the wire, you still get paid, you still get your job, you still get the trophy, and people just talk bad about you on the internet and point at you and boo at you like you're Hulk Hogan doing a Hollywood Hogan turn. You know what I mean? Like that's really what this has become. It's become what's the wrestling, a work. It's become a work.
Well, and that was kind of my point as far as calling things into question. First of all, I'd say this.
Maybe Perry's a work. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Maybe it should be. This should reiterate the point that we shouldn't be looking to sports, and I would also say politics, for our moral compass necessarily in our own individual daily lives. But again, these things imitate life, and we know that there are very various dubious characters in real life, and so from that standpoint. Should we really be that surprised that they exist in sports or politics or business or whatever the
Well, no
entity
one
is that
wants
we're
to
talking
think
about.
Bob
I mean,
Baffert is
beyond
a dubious
maybe,
guy, right? Like literally, that's part of this. Is that Brady Anderson
well,
maybe, but Cal Ripken never.
sure.
Cal could never. Cal would never, right? Like Cal never, not Cal. I mean, all the rest of them did, but not Cal. So like that's how we feel about Cal, right? Like that's just it, and that's dangerous, and that's. I mean, not Lance. I mean, Lance is, Sheryl Crow, and he's Lance. I mean, not Lance. I mean, not there. OJ. I mean, OJ ran football. He smiled. He ran through airport. I mean, it's OJ. He couldn't. No, not OJ. That's how we are.
Yeah.
And that's where Donald Trump on The Apprentice he took this country. Bob Baffert is beloved, right? I mean, he is the most beloved. He's liked. He's liked by me. He's liked by your mom. He's liked by people in the industry. So it's different with Belichick. He wears a hoodie. He's a prick.
Yeah.
It's a different vibe on it, but no one wants to believe Bob Baffert in the way no one wanted to believe OJ, in the way that no one wanted to believe Lance. And then the track record is how many horses over what period of time, and how much has he won, and by how much has he won, and Secretariat did what, and how many home runs did Barry Bonds hit? He's hitting 80 home runs. That's not normal. So you start to get into that, right? And I think we've hit that with Baffert this week, which is why you and I are doing 30 minutes here on horse racing Preakness week, because it's weird. It got real weird on Sunday. Acosta's talking horse racing with horse racing people, and they're like, this guy wins too much. This guy hits too many homers. I mean, I like him, but he hits too many homers. Mark McGwire. We none of us wanted to believe Mark McGwire, right?
Well, I think there was suspicion at the time with Mark McGwire. I mean, let's face it. I mean, you look at what he looked like in the late 80s compared to what he looked like come 1995.
Speaking of that, Tom Boswell had his career threatened. Tom Boswell was given Russian state. The great Tom Boswell retired this week. Boswell was chased around by those guys and called Satan by all the Bash brothers. Go look it up. They treated him like a pariah because he reported the truth. And it's very, right. I mean, be very hard for somebody inside the horse racing industry to go after Bob Baffert. Everybody's going to go after Bob Baffert this week.
Sure. Well, but we also see the instances, and we've seen this with the Hall of Fame conversation with baseball for the longest time, where we've tried to make voters be the judge, jury, and executioner as it relates to being in the Hall of Fame or not, and without having necessarily concrete. It's one thing to talk about someone that fails a drug test like Rafael Palmeiro did in 2005, or talking about Manny Ramirez, for example. It's another thing to talk about someone from the 90s or the early 2000s at a point in time where baseball, and let's not absolve Bud Selig and ownership, and for as much as there might have been some journalists asking questions, there were others who didn't necessarily ask questions or went along for the ride. Why? Because post-strike, it ended up being a lucrative time for Major League Baseball. So there's a lot of culpability that's involved with it, but it kind of brings it back when these types of things happen. You always hear trust but verify, but when it continues to happen where you can't verify, the trust gets lost. And that's where as a sports fan, or as we're talking about this, as people who cover this for a living, you do get to a point where it's difficult not to be cynical in that way. And that's why I kind of said maybe it is a reminder that let's not be so quick to use athletes and politicians and public figures as a moral compass, unless they truly have shown enough over the years to have earned that. And that's as I get older. I mean, sure, did I idolize Cal Ripken as a child? Yeah. Do I still very much admire and respect Cal Ripken all these years later? Yes. Do I consider as a 37-year-old now? Do I consider athletes to be personal heroes of mine? No. That's my mom. That's people in my life that I know more personally, more intimately. So from that standpoint, you struggle. I mean, you struggle with it but at the same time, I think we keep coming back to it, knowing that that's not everybody within, and I think that's where you don't want to be too cynical, because I think we have had players in Major League Baseball, and baseball is the one we talk about, which it's hilarious. I mean, football players get pop, they pop for PEDs, and it's forgotten about. Does anyone talk about the fact that Haloti Ngata tested positive for PEDs late in the 2014 season? No one cares. So, you kind of look at the various, Sean Merriman way back when, a Maryland guy, he tested positive. So it is interesting as far as which environments draw more outrage compared to others, but it's just something I think to be mindful of, and that you don't want to be too cynical, because you get to a point where it devalues it completely, or to your point, you just lose all trust in there being any integrity or any legitimacy to it. But that's why it's disappointing when something like that happens. I will say this: I think it's very important to let the process play out. Not just talking Bob Baffert and Medina Spirit, but anytime something like this happens. But I mean, for someone who's not a big horse racing fan by any means, I'm not going to try to pretend to be one, but someone who digs the Triple Crown every year and watches all 3 races, to hear something like this, it's disheartening. I mean, it really is. And again, it calls into question everything that Bob Baffert's accomplished as a result.
Luke Jones joining us here. We're usually talking a little baseball, a little football. I was over Costas on Sunday watching the Orioles play. We will get to some Oriole conversation. This is the last thing I'll say on this before we even break, and we'll get into the winter wonderland of the week. But the basis of horse racing and the gambling part of it, it's there to gamble on, right? Mm-hmm. Like much different than any other sport, which until last week or last month, baseball wasn't really involved in this thing. Wink, wink. Now we got teams in Vegas and 2 sports and whatnot. But horse racing, the basis of it is it's there to gamble on. There's no other purpose other than watching the ponies run around the track. You don't pull for Bob Baffert. It's not like NASCAR where you have people root for jockeys. They don't. They bet on it. That's what they do. So it is different than the other sports in that way. And the creature doesn't talk, right? So the creature doesn't know what's in the hay, right? Like, so there's all of that. I find it fascinating now that for this sport, and we go back 100 years, the Guys and Dolls, and anything that would happen on the backside of a track that the mafia would be involved in, and organized crime, which is where they loved that was the urban legend, was back in the day. Organized crime would look to manipulate that industry for not as an inducement to wager. I think that's at the seed of it. That's about to change everywhere, right? Because every sport's about to really become that for real. I mean, 10 years from now,
mainstream, right?
Yeah, 47-year-old Luke Jones and 62-year-old Nestor will view, and 20 years from now, the baby that's in your niece or nephew will view sports gambling is baked into the cake. And if you're into sports, chances are you'll be gambling on it. That'll be part of it, because they're taking more of the team out of it, the more of the player out of it, more of the Hall of Fame out of it, more of the purity out of it. And it's just it's a place to get action. And they're going to start broadcasting it more in that way. And they're a part of it. The leagues are a part of it. They're in on it. Oh my God, this is one trainer, one horse, one thing. The amount of moving parts when you got guys willing to beat on trash cans to win, when you have guys willing to find drug dealers, giving them who the hell knows what in syringes to win. And now on top of that, you're going to pour the money's right here. It's on the app. It's right here, 100 grand. Just tonight's game. You don't have to worry about next week. It's the old Pete Rose. You know what I mean? That's the way it always goes. And it always goes that Art Schleister's involved. And I learned that. It was a great story I read in Sports Illustrated back when I was far younger than you. I was on the radio maybe in the early 90s. And it was before Tim Donaghy even. But I remember reading a really good takeout Sports Illustrated cover piece on gambling. And it was written in that way, in that here's a scenario. Scenario is Art Schleister's the quarterback for a lousy team at the end of a year. He's got a gambling problem. I mean, that would never happen to like Pete Rose. That would never happen to like Michael Jordan or anybody else. I mean, these, gambling in sports have run 1 and 1A. I mean, Pete Rose was at the racetrack all day long when he would come to town. So I would just say the issue is in the corruptibility of paying a stable person in the horse racing industry something that would pay them something that would be life altering. And I would think if you're the one feeding Bob Baffert's hay at Santa Anita, no offense, you might be making $15 an hour, but it probably isn't much north of that. And what's life altering, what somebody would do for 50 grand or 100 grand to throw a horse race, there aren't a whole lot of people making a whole lot of money beyond Barry Bonds and A-Rod. It's all the way down the food chain as to where corruptibility would happen at a UMBC basketball game or a Towson basketball game, that it wouldn't take much. Couple 3-5 grand for a kid to miss a couple of free throws in a game against Lehigh. This is the thing that concerns me the most, that where the edge is on the field to cheat, it's absurd. They'll beat trash cans. They'll put monkeys in trees with cameras. They'll mic the other team. Forget stealing signs, man. You know what I mean? Like, they'll climb through roofs to remove cork bats. Like, it's gangster shit, man. You know what I mean? Like, literally, that's the thing that concerns me about gambling in sports now, that this opens up a Pandora's box to me to say, how many people could be involved in doping that animal not named Baffert, and him really not even knowing about it until he's got to go stand there because the stable hand wanted to win. Or whomever. I don't know who that is, but there's a lot of people that touch a horse, a lot of things, and that's just horse racing. But I'm talking about in general sports, the corruptibility of all of it is a slippery slope from, hey, Julio, we just bang on the trash can twice, just you and me. Hey, Luke, come on in on it. That's how it happened in Houston, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, and you just laid out why most of professional sports have been so incredibly reluctant to erase that line between sports and gambling. I mean, you just laid it out because of that. Now, you hope that in some ways it polices itself in the way that, because there's a winning side, and if they're not doing it on the up and up, the losing side is hurt by that. So you hope that there is a very large element of it policing itself, because you're also thinking you don't want to be on the wrong side of that at some point in time. But yeah, I mean, I'm speaking as someone who does I mean, I've never placed a bet with a quote bookie or anything like that. Do I have friends who have? Yeah, absolutely. I have friends who have made pretty good money doing it, not in a lucrative, life-changing way, but in a way where, you can make a few $100 or a couple $1,000,
Dude, I've owned a sports radio station for 30 years. All I've known are dudes with gambling issues and problems and fixations that I do not understand. I do not have that jam. I do not have that Jones. I've had some good nights in Vegas. I've had some bad nights in Vegas.
Right.
I like, it's just not my jam. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Never has been. And
but it is for a lot of people, though.
I don't talk it. Well, the fantasy part's a jam too for people, right?
Sure.
And that's more of a
Everyone plays fantasy football, but you. I mean, that's just reality right now. I mean, but you're right.
They have a fantasy team. They're called the Ravens, man. I
understand that, but there's my mom has played fantasy football for years now in our one family league.
Do you win money in her league or no?
You can. I don't know.
See, you're playing for money.
Yeah. So there you. But again,
what's happened to pride in this world, huh? God.
There's nothing wrong with fantasy football, but again, you just laid it out, and I'm not anti-sports gambling by any means. I mean, like I said, some of my closest friends regularly bet on sports, but some of what you laid out is why I always joke with people, and I've always kind of in a smart aleck way said, I know enough about sports not to bet on them. And part of that
I tell people Marvin Lewis would always say to me, he would sit in that office over there and always like, I can't believe people bet on this. He's like, I have no idea what's going to happen. I know we could win. Like I can draw it up that if things go right, but like, I can't believe people bet on this.
I mean, look what happened with Lamar. I mean, even though the Ravens won the game, look what happened with Lamar Jackson in the Monday night game at Cleveland. I mean, he missed nearly a full quarter because of cramps or, whatever, whether he had to go to the bathroom, like so many people still maintain, whatever it was, he wasn't available. And the Ravens were literally seconds away from Willie Snead having to take the snap on 4th down in a play that could have been the difference of them making the playoffs or not. When you kind of look at where they were at that point in the season. So yeah, it's crazy in that way. At the same time, people who are deep in the weeds with it and really know what they're talking about, they'll tell you, if you really know what you're doing, there's money to be made. I mean, there absolutely is. Talk about people betting on the ponies, people who really understand it and really study it and really have the experience with it. There are people who've they've made a fortune, literally made a fortune for and changed their life. At the same time, you look on the flip side of it and how many lives it's potentially ruined. Again, not going to present any crusade against gambling, but part of this goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about how potentially problematic it can be. And what happened at the Kentucky Derby now, and seeing how this week is going to play out with the Preakness and the fallout. And I mean, again, we're talking about Bob Baffert here. Even someone like me who doesn't know anything about horse racing knows who he is and knows what success he's had. So it's jarring. And again, it does come back to that question. Again, we can debate all day the gray area, the fine line between, quote, gamesmanship and blatant cheating, and wherever that line is, and where you might think it is might be different than what I think of it or someone else. But at some point in time, when you're talking about something as jarring as a Kentucky Derby winner, a few days later, this coming out, it calls into question the legitimacy of it all. And look, me, I love pro wrestling, but there's the reasons I love pro wrestling are not the same reasons why I love pro sports that are legitimate competition, where you're not supposed to have predetermined winners in the way that pro wrestling has that. So yeah, I mean, anytime that happens, it's damaging to the sport. It might not show up right away in the way that, what happened with Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and that crew didn't ruin baseball overnight, but is there a fallout there over time? And again, we kind of point to baseball just because of steroids and all that. I mentioned football, how people seem to brush off a PED suspension and then forget about it 2 weeks later. It's interesting to kind of look at those two cultures in that way. But anytime you're calling into question the legitimacy of an outcome, the legitimacy of whether it's a horse, whether it's an athlete, whether it's a team, a coach, whatever, inherently, yeah, that's going to be damaging. At the same time, do I think it's so damaging to the point where people turn away from it entirely or turned off from it entirely? No. And maybe that says more about us as viewers, as spectators, as consumers, than it even says about the villains themselves. But that's where I do come back and say, from a perspective standpoint, again, not excusing Bob Baffert or the Astros or whoever you want to mention, Bill Belichick. People have cheated and tried to find edges in sport as long as sport has existed. I'd probably go back to the ancient Roman times, the Colosseum. You'll find probably there were scandals that went on without anyone knowing. But it is one of those things where I kind of pump the brakes and remind myself that these are imperfect characters in the way that we find imperfect characters in every walk of life. And that's why I think it's important for us to be very selective, very careful with our moral compass as far as who we're going to put on a pedestal, because short of some, even people in your own life, you don't know with 100% certainty, but certainly you trust them. You have more of a track record with them, more so than some individual who is really gifted at doing something, in the sporting arena, to be careful not to put them on a pedestal prematurely or, in a way that's not genuine.
In our next segment, we will relitigate the Tom Brady Deflategate.
Oh, no. I still recall that Super Bowl week by about Tuesday afternoon. Oh, I was just talking about deflated footballs and
you know what?
pound
Chuck
per
Pagano is
square
retired
inch of
now.
the.
It's time to get square with Chuck and DPs and figure out what really happened there. I'm gonna Paul Harvey that and get the rest of the story. Luke Jones can be found Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. You can find me Ness at BaltimorePositive.com or at the previously stated Nasty at WNST.net. I'm putting together a crab cake tour that's going to begin at Fadley's and at Costas this week. Doesn't this Costas shirt look great? I said to Nick and Pete, I got to get this shirt. It's their 50th anniversary. Can you see that on the back?
That's
50th
sharp.
anniversary. Yeah, man. So this is sharp. So I was wearing this. Me and Stan Jablonski went over. We cracked a half dozen. I got some mushroom stuffed crab imperial jams, and I got oysters Rockefeller because I wanted to feel rich and decadent with the spinach in there and the cheese. It was delicious. My thanks to Costas. I did not have a crab cake, Luke, because I'm having one this week because we're kicking the tour off at Fadley's. We're kicking it off at Costas, and I will never again in my life order a crab cake other than on Fridays at the show. I'm committed to one crab cake a week the rest of my life or the rest of the radio show until they throw me off the radio or bury me under a crab cake someplace. So we're doing this, and we're making it happen. Luke and I are going to talk some baseball, some football, get you ready for scheduling with the Ravens as well as the new offensive line. And the Orioles going back to Shea or whatever they call it. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive. Our intelligent conversations are brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets. So we call them Wise Conversations.